Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beefing with Ben. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing UFC play-by-play commentator. He's one of the most well-known voices in mixed martial arts these days. It's Jon Anik. So, Jon, first of all, thank you for taking the time to jump in with me. I'm going to try this new catchphrase. Tell me if it's good. We're going to settle some beef. So
yeah,
we're trying.
There you go. It's great to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. I will say I'm not much of a catchphrase guy, at least in terms of getting ahead of it. Certainly things that I've, latched on to, like one more sleep and other things have maybe manifested organically. But if you have any catchphrases that you think I should incorporate into the UFC telecast, you're free to tell me over the next 30 minutes, of course.
We'll see if I can come up with something over the next 30 minutes or so. So just really quickly before we begin, to everyone listening, please make sure to go like the video. It really does help us a lot. If you can, subscribe to the channel The Fight Site Presents. Hit the bell notification. It lets you know when the videos are going to be coming out. Make sure you check out the actual Fight Site for the best combat sports analysis you're going to get, from boxing to even lethway to wrestling to jiu-jitsu. Every type of combat sport. We just dropped something about sumo. So really every interest you could possibly have with regard to combat sports, we have it. Check out our Patreon for exclusive content, access to the Discord channel, as well as our merchandise shop. And if you like any of the flavors, they sound good, Jon enjoys them, recommends them, you can order at bensbeefjerkyspot.com. So with that out of the way, try the first flavor. Always recommend starting with the Ben's Original. Started it by complete accident, and this is the catalyst for it. So
as I was telling you off the air, the jerky arrived on the same day that my world famous Say coffee arrived, and the jerky just overwhelmed the coffee. With respect to the coffee, smelled delicious. I'm very excited to try it. I did not try it before we went on the air today. This is the Ben's Original. We'll see how it goes.
Enjoy.
I tried to show up hungry, Yeah, so I am not I'm not a connoisseur per se, but I have had my share of jerky in my day. Ben's Original is outstanding. Hits you hard off the top with the salt right out of the chute, and then it sort of softens, which is not sort of an effect that any other jerky has given me. So big fan of the Ben's Original. I just want to try this TK onion. Is that teriyaki onion? Is that what that is?
So that is, okay, I had to do one fight-related flavor, so it's just technical onion. I changed it from the original. It was like a sweet and spicy one.
All right. So this is the one that I've had my eye on. This is great, though, man. The packaging and everything else,
Very different flavor profile than the first one, I'll tell you that.
Oh, bro. I mean, should I not be opening all of these today, right?
You do whatever you want. It is yours. You can enjoy them as much as you want, whenever you want.
Maximizing freshness, right? Maybe I open 3 today, Ben. What do we think about that?
So the beauty of this is you put it in a plastic Ziploc bag, just squeeze the air out, and it'll last you in the fridge as long as you need it to. So just enjoy as many as you want.
Bro, I know we got some stuff to talk about, that TKO onion. All right, last one I'm going to try. At least for now. Maple glaze. Dude, that TK onion that's banging for me. That's more up my alley, I think, than the original in terms of like long-term ordering. All right, we're now trying the maple glaze.
Very different than the other two as well. So you picked the 3 different flavor profiles that you could try.
Look at that. We keeping the language clean today, or what? You have a lot of young listeners.
Go to town.
Would you guys look at fucking that? The marbleization on the beef. That's delicious. All right, so I just went back to the original. I mean, that's damn good. Like, if you're gonna sort of hang your hat on an original recipe, I don't know exactly what I'm eating, but bro, this TKO onion, bro. Like,
that's my personal.
This will be gone today, I can assure you.
That's my personal favorite flavor, the TK onion. My best friend argues with me nonstop and will always go to Ben's Original, but for me, it's the TK onion. That's my favorite. The sweet, the spice. It's just like a flavor bomb is how I describe it. So that's definitely my go-to.
Love it.
I just kind of wanted to, I always try to start at the beginning, no matter what interview I'm doing. I always want to know how you got started on this path. What drew you to broadcasting in the first place? So just talk to me about that.
So I grew up in the Metro West Boston area. It's obviously a rabid sports town. And I knew from a pretty young age that I wanted to work in sports. It took me a while to figure out what the hell I was doing. But as I've encouraged young people, and certainly my children, you will find your passion, but you got to throw a lot of different things at the wall. And for me, I think sports were kind of going to be shoved down our throats growing up there, whether we liked it or not. Our mom was just a huge sports fan and just grew up at a time where Boston sports for her in the 60s, was really a fun place to be. So I basically thought I was going to be a sports writer, maybe try to be a radio host at one point in time. But I just had a hard time getting traction. I was working for the Metro West Daily News covering high school volleyball and wrestling and making $25 a story. I probably took home 17. And that was after a long work day that preceded it, and so I felt like even though I had a 4-year degree, I really needed to go back to school for broadcasting, get some career training, and that would allow me to get an internship and maybe get a foot in the door at a radio station. So that was the path that I took. And I know some people in my life sort of were surprised that I would go take out a loan at that point and sort of go back for career training when I had a journalism degree, but I felt like that's what I needed to do, and eventually was able to go the radio path, which led to TV, and got a lot of breaks, had a lot of good people who supported me along the way, and sort of here we are. But the martial arts part of it, developed really out of a boxing radio show that was launched in about 2005. And, thankfully I was into combat sports and covering combat sports at a time when not a lot of people like me, I guess, were covering it. So there you go.
And speaking of your role, you started calling fights for the UFC in, I believe it was January 2012 or something. So it's almost a decade ago now. I think we know that fighters over the course of their careers, they develop new skills, their bodies change, they get stronger faster as they get more into their prime, and then they start to decline. So like that, I imagine something like this, you're going to develop more skills and you're going to refine your approach and technique, and you're going to learn new things. So along the way, what kind of lessons would you say that you've learned and things you've been able to improve on, things that you realize, hey, this doesn't work, I need to pare that out of my game, quote unquote?
It's a great, thoughtful question. I almost need a clock in the lower right to tell me how much time I have to answer it. And yeah, I mean, I think for me and my twin brother who listens with a very close ear, if we go back and watch some of my early calls, it's like, oh God, Now, I will tell you in terms of my voice, there's been a lot of evolution. I can't sit here and tell you that I use my diaphragm perfectly, but I've learned how to use my voice better. I've voiced 2 video games, which have certainly damaged my voice. I've called hundreds of UFC fights, probably thousands of fights at this point, and that has deepened and I think broadened my voice a little bit in terms of this just as an instrument. In terms of actually calling the fights, I probably worked with 15 different broadcast teams. When I was cutting my teeth, it was almost exclusively 2-man booth, me doing all the post-fight interviews. So the job has evolved in some respects. In a 3-man booth, there's less real estate, so I have to selectively pick my spots. Certainly, since I've been elevated to pay-per-view, the sales and sponsorship component to my job really completely changes effectively my fight night. So there have been a lot of different hurdles and obstacles. I guess in terms of just nuts and bolts calling a fight, I'm certainly more comfortable with like the mixed martial arts vernacular, but I call fights very similarly, Ben, right? It's like I'm still not stepping out of my lane trying to, talk about hip escapes and Kimura sweeps and things like that extensively. I have 2 men to my right who are beyond capable of doing that, and it's really not my job, So even though maybe my knowledge of the sport has gotten better, I still try to stay in my lane, at least as far as analysis, because ultimately in the traditional broadcast booth, I'm a play-by-play announcer. I'm not providing color and I'm not really providing analysis. I know we bleed that line, but I think about the traditional role more often than not.
So it's interesting because that kind of bleeds into the next question that I was going to ask you, because oftentimes, when you're, as a non-fighter, you're someone who isn't necessarily biased in the sense that I was part of the game. I understand it on a deeper level than a regular fan or somebody behind the booth. So as you mentioned, like you try not to kind of you try to stay in your lane a bit, but are there times where you feel that, hey, I feel like there's something that I can add to this from my perspective as an outsider? So for an example, Dominic Cruz is one of the greatest of all time and loves wrestling. We know that when he's breaking down wrestling in the cage, it's fantastic and it's really detailed. But sometimes we know that fighters can also get stuck in a narrative or something that they want to see or that they would do that the fighter in the cage can't necessarily execute or won't be in the right state of mind to do so. Do you ever feel kind of like, I guess, to pull it back to the center or something like that from your point of view?
Yes, absolutely. And there's certainly times where I'll ask what to me is a rhetorical question. Maybe I know what needs to happen, or the fan in me feels like I know acutely what the fuck needs to happen right then and there. I'll offer up a question just to sort of help enhance the broadcast a little bit. I do think with age and with time on the microphone, not that you develop cachet, but I think comfort and a willingness to maybe talk about a judge's scorecard when traditionally that would be left to the analysts, So there are things like that I think have evolved with the job.
So what are your thoughts on fighters who, I remember Cub Swanson said that all MMA media should have at least, I think it was like 3 fights or something like that. That kind of mentality, I guess, towards the MMA analysis or commentary who haven't had that experience. What are your feelings on that kind of viewpoint and mentality? And do you also, I guess, think it's a little bit important for, people who comment on this sport for a job or as a hobby to experience that themselves?
So my primary goal in my job is to support this roster and all the athletes individually as best I can. I think if you were to get fighters on here, a lot of them would say that at some point in time, however low profile, I have commented on their Instagram photo or tried to support them with a tweet or with something on the broadcast. I disagree with Cub Swanson on this. I mean, wholeheartedly, right? And it's not about me, because I have a huge appreciation, if not empathy, obviously, for everything that these athletes go through, right? When I used to host a show called UFC Ultimate Insider, there was talk early on about a feature in which I would cut down to featherweight, and ultimately that didn't end up happening. Now I could make 35 if I had to. But again, what these athletes go through, it really is unique to combat sports. Just the individualization that maybe golf and tennis have, but they don't have the 3-a-days for 6 months and the combat nature of our sport and, defending your face instead of a rim, I mean, I do think that there is value to be gained by any skill development for any one of us. I've taken boxing classes, I've taken jujitsu, I immerse myself in the sport as best I can, as anybody who has 3 kids, 10 and under can, I guess. But I don't think it's a prerequisite. I really don't. And I think you could easily throw it back on him and say, yes, Daniel Cormier has a 4-year degree in sociology, but does everybody who cracks a microphone need career training in broadcasting? You know what I mean? Like, I certainly needed to acquire a lot of broadcasting skills and years. I remember, and I'm sure you do, like when you used to apply for jobs, minimum 3 to 5 years on air experience. Like, how the fuck do you expect me to go acquire 3 to 5 years of broadcast experience? And a lot of athletes are credentialed in the broadcast space because of what they've done in the octagon. So Cub and I are on different sides of that, but I do respect his take. And I think generally there's a good point within his larger point that I don't agree with.
Jumping off this, and this one I totally understand if you can't really delve too deep into it. Your role and your job, of course, at the end of the day, while I'm sure you're a fan of the sport, and obviously we know that, I imagine would limit what you're able to say and do publicly as it pertains to the sport and certain topics and stuff like that, and things you might want to do. So I'm just curious how you kind of juggle that, and because your job is to talk, you're constantly on these different shows. So how do you juggle that? I want to say this, I'm only able to say this, and how do you do that, essentially?
Well, it's hard. Again, it's a great question. I try not to perjure myself. I probably try to walk right up to the line without crossing it, right? And that's just because I have a strong opinion, and inevitably at times maybe I have to curb it or cloak it completely. But when I sort of left ESPN in 2011 and joined the UFC, I knew I was trading in my journalist card for a promoter's one. So the job did change. The job description did change. And, that at times is going to affect what I am able to do. Professionally, I'm exclusive, so I can't really take football opportunities were they to come my way. And so there is some exclusivity and some security, obviously, in all of that. But I enjoy being a promoter, right? Because at the end of the day, I really am promoting the athletes, and journalistically, when I feel so inclined or need to be inclined, I think I have the freedom within the broadcast to do that, and the freedom on my podcast and in other places to do that. But certainly there have been times where I've gotten myself in trouble, and that's never the intention. I think probably people close to me would be thankful that I haven't gotten in more hot water, but here we are.
So the next two questions are kind of, I guess, focused on the status of MMA as it is today with regard to, I guess the first one we'll start with is judging. And I know that you've talked about this, and frankly, everyone has talked about judging in the sport. It's a well-known issue if you're paying even the slightest bit of attention. There are so many different solutions and, ideas that people have had, from open scoring. I know that is something. And what realistically would need to change? Is it the athletic commissions obviously need to step up and do something, but without that happening, would you say open scoring with more judges, so that kind of like bad scorecards kind of get diluted among those 5 judges or whatever?
Yeah.
Or do you think a third party organization being established to penalize judges and refs that make bad calls?
Again, it's a thoughtful question. When I get this question, oftentimes I want to turn it around on the host and see what you think, right? But I will say, and I went to pull up, what a 10-8 round constitutes in MMA. And so here's the thing. The immediate thing that I believe we can do is have 5 judges, right, to lessen the margin for error. But John McCarthy would tell you that maybe there are only 8 to 10 elite judges in the world. That's a direct quote. I love you, Big John. So I don't know. I mean, how many elite judges or how many satisfactory judges are there to allow for us to have 5 judges at all of our 41 shows? I don't know the answer to that question, but in terms of an immediate solution, that's the thing that seems most obvious. I mean, I'd love to do something like Verdict MMA, where a global scorecard was the determinant, because I think the success rate for something like that, where you're polling an aggregate, really is high, the success rate. Open scoring is tricky, and I know you probably thought a lot about this. It effectively changes the sport. So that's asking a lot of the athletes and the coaches, even though I'm all for change. Like, I do think, generally speaking, that change is good. I just think open scoring is probably taking it a little bit too far. But you got to go 5 wide with the judges, even if they're learning on the job. That would be my advice. We can't be doing much worse than we're doing now.
True. Wow. Yeah, that's actually that is the best way to put it, but also the most depressing way to put it. We can't be doing much worse than we're doing now. And I think you're right with regard to open scoring, because open scoring tells the fighters where the judges are at, but it doesn't mean that the judges aren't going to be putting in bad scores.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily change it.
In the bathroom during round 2 and they missed what you did. Sorry.
Or that guy who got a picture taken of him looking at his phone during the fight. So on the other end of that, so now the actual rules of the sport, it's still a relatively young sport. We're only the UFC is less than 30 years old. Despite all this growth we've seen in a few decades, things are still kind of in flux. Khalil Roundtree's most recent victory, we had that stomp kick to the knee. It was really brutal. It's kind of reignited that debate a little bit about banning certain techniques. I know fighters are falling on both sides of it, and commentators and fans and all that. I've seen tons of debate about it. And we're seeing, like in football and other sports, they're trying to take things more seriously with regard to the health of the players. And what kind of direction do you think MMA will take going forward as it pertains to these kinds of techniques and rule sets? Do you think that we're going to see more of a paring down of allowable techniques, or do you see maybe like a push to go like, no, we should actually open up the things that are allowed, allow grounded knees and stuff like that?
It won't be that. It will go in the other direction. Of that, I can assure you. Certainly in a climate in which you have a partnership with ESPN, we're not all of a sudden open up the conversation that allow knees to the head of a grounded opponent.
Of course.
So, yeah, I mean, I think my opinion should be dismissed if there was a fighter here. But since I guess you're a budding fighter, right? But since there's not a fighter here, my opinion would be that the kick should be allowable. But every time I hear a UFC lightweight contender like Brad Riddell say, man, I worked too hard to get there, you should eliminate it, I feel like, oh, you're right, so I've waffled. But largely, I think when you start to eliminate like a lower leg technique, a kick from one fighter's leg to another, I just think you're really opening up a can. There are fans out there that think the calf kick has it has revolutionized the game in some parts. It has changed the game, whatever it's done. Some people don't like what it's done to the sport. You know what I mean? And people go into great lengths to try to employ them, oftentimes at their own detriment, So I don't know, man. It's a tricky question, but if I have to fall on a side today, it's that I think that should be allowable. And I think largely, most people are resistant to like major change. And I just don't think you're going to see major change when it comes to that over the next 5 to 7 years.
Do you fall more on the side of the, I guess, argument of, the fighter should learn how to defend these techniques? For example, Pedro Munoz trying the calf kick like 4 dozen times against Jose Aldo, and Aldo checking every single one, basically, right? Like, is it on the fighters to no, or is he, for example, when Robert Whittaker was attempting that side stomping kick, was able to not only get out of the way, but to then turn it into a high kick return. So is it would you fall on that kind of side of things where it's like the fighter should, if there's a new technique that's maybe being utilized effectively, defensively, we have to catch up?
Well, certainly. You can be sure my man Brad Riddell, one of my favorite athletes on the roster, is thinking about that after going public, thinking they should be banned. Now he's probably got to start to think about that a little bit. But I think Dan Hardy, my former colleague, has brought up a lot of good points on this. And for people listening to my podcast, maybe this is, a little bit repetitive, but we can quantify leg damage, right? And we can't necessarily quantify the damage from a head kick, right? The dude gets up and sits on a stool and has no visible damage, whereas Modestas Bukauskas won't fight for 16 months. You know what I mean? So that's a tricky part of things too. If we could quantify head damage, and say he just got a concussion that really, since we know what type of brain damage was inflicted, now he's out for 18 months, but we don't know that.
You have an insane schedule. What do you do when you do every time? How do you unwind? What do you like to do just when you have that little bit of time to yourself?
So I'm thankful that the NFL is back in season as a lifelong New England Patriots fan, even though they're 0-1 out of the chute. But I've been playing a lot of golf recently. I took about 4 years off, and Daniel Cormier has actually been the guy that's really gotten me back into it. So I think if I forecast a time when I'm healthy enough to maybe walk away from broadcasting, and maybe I'm not, and my voice doesn't allow me to continue, my goal would be to try to play golf every day and see if I can make the senior tour. So some people wanted to, maybe boat or be on the water. I am probably happiest on a golf course, or really playing any sport. That's the thing. It's I have a living, breathing human being who is my identical twin, looks just like me, sounds just like me. So we're very competitive. So we can go play tennis or go play basketball. I love doing all that stuff. But bro, I work out as much as I can, but it's still much more of an injury risk at my age playing basketball or tennis. So I hate to sit here at 43 and say this, but it's every time I play hoops these days, bro, I get injured. So it might just have to be off from here on out. But it's busy with the kids. I love the beach. We're 10 minutes from the beach, which is great. And, just enjoying being in South Florida after 4 years in Nevada, for sure.
The one question to bring it back to just broadcasting in general, the last few years have been something. Throughout that time when we were doing the empty arenas and compared to the full crowds, I know that I'm sure you were very excited to actually just get back into the arena and call fights again. What kind of stuff did you enjoy, if any, about broadcasting in in the Apex where there's no crowd, compared to having that excitement of having the crowd and that energy? Are there benefits to the no crowd that you really enjoyed and appreciated? And what are the benefits of the crowd, obviously, aside from the excitement?
Well, see, this is how you could get me in trouble, right? Because it's not past tense, right? Most of the shows that I will call the rest of the year be at the UFC Apex without a full crowd. Yeah, we'll have some VIPs, and some of those intimate crowds at the Apex are louder and more lathered than others, which makes it nice. But it's hard for me to lean into too much positivity and upside in the UFC Apex versus the T-Mobile Arena. Certainly you can hear the coaches more clearly, and there are certain things maybe in fight that are better for people at home, really being able to hear the thwack of certain kicks and things like that. but it's not as though I'm able to like hear my broadcast partners better in that environment for whatever reason. It actually is worse. I don't know why. In terms of like hearing DC 2 stories down from me to my right. So I don't know, man. I have experienced both. I guess like DC, if he was doing this interview, he would probably say, "Oh, it's nice to be able to go to the restroom and not have to navigate the fans," But you sitting here asking me when we have these intermittent shows with fans, like I want all of it. I want to piss at a urinal with a UFC fan on my right and another one on.
So now to go a little bit less serious, or maybe serious, depending on your answer, I guess. I'm sure you have a few behind the scenes stories that won't get you in trouble or anyone else in trouble. Just some insane shit that's happened. It's fighters. We're fans. It's a special type of sport. What are some of the more, I guess, ridiculous things that have happened in your experiences behind the scenes or backstage during fighter meetings or whatever it is?
Oh gosh, it's hard, right? I almost need to come up with a better answer for this, right? And have it all listed down when I get asked these questions, because as you can see, I'm like trying to like think in my head.
Totally.
But I remember once we had a matchmaker meeting. We used to do matchmaker meetings with Joe Silva and Sean Shelby. And the commentators, we would sit down and talk to the matchmakers. Why'd you make this matchup? What do you see for this guy in the future? And And so I wanted Joe Silva to sign Ben Askren. So Ben sent me a funky Ben shirt. Askren didn't know I was going to wear it to the matchmaker meeting, but I don't think Joe Silva was a fan of Ben Askren at the time per se. I don't think he was ever really a fan, if I'm being honest, and at least in terms of the athlete and signing him. And so I wore my Ben Askren t-shirt to the fighter meeting, and Joe did not take too kindly to that. So much craziness in our UFC circus, man. Like I honestly wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, some of these fighter meetings take on just a life of their own. Sometimes we'll have a fighter meeting, we'll crack a mic, so to speak, right? We ask one question and they'll rip for 7 or 8 minutes, Other times, Sergey Spivak doesn't want anything to do with us, and we show the polar bear the door, So I don't know, man. It's a great, great gig. A lot of crazy things have happened. I remember calling fights on the equator in Fortaleza, Brazil. My shirt was completely soaked through with sweat before the first prelim, and our late pay-per-view producer, the unbelievable Bruce Connell, was like, "Dude, you got to get another shirt." It's like, "What, you think I bring like a backup dress shirt?" But it's been a wild ride, man. It's crazy to think I've done like 27 shows in Brazil, and now here we are. I don't know when I'll ever go back. It's just crazy to think about.
Next tattoo bet, and is it for Lawler Diaz too? Are you going to double up the 209?
For Lawler Diaz too. That's a good question. The last one we did sort of softly was if Kamaru Usman lost to Jorge Masvidal. We were doing the Game Bread tattoo. Mm-hmm. And again, all of these are tattoos I want. Like even Kayla Harrison was like, "Why do you want the FE for Frankie Edgar tattooed on your body for the rest of your life?" And it's multi-purpose, right? It's obviously a nod to Frankie, but FE is the symbol for iron, right? There's a million things you can lean into on that. But I like to do it around title fights, right? Like I wish, Ben, we could do like a Lauren Murphy bet with you right now, but I don't have one on the tip of my tongue. But there will be another tattoo bet, and it's win-win for me, right? It's like I would not. It really is. It's not. I would never do the Tyron Woodley, Jake Paul thing and do a tattoo bet for a tattoo that I didn't want. I mean, that's foolishness. I would have to, in some way, shape, or form, want the ink to do that.
Right. And I guess the last question, and this is for broadcasting, I think it's a very important one. How hard is it to not just absolutely blast out as many curses as possible while calling these fights? Because I imagine if you're watching at home, there's going to be a couple of holy shits or fuck yeahs that drop. So
yeah, well,
yeah,
that Ben's original, man. I'm not giving it the one slot necessarily, but that's what I've been. That's what I go back to. What were we talking about anyway? This fucking jerky. What'd you just ask me, bro?
How hard is it to not just drop a couple of F-bombs on air?
So I can't believe it hasn't happened yet. No, it's not that hard, right? Like I don't go out of my way to cuss in front of my children, but I want them to know who I am if I pass tomorrow, right? So I try to, balance that a little bit. I guess it's hard because we just swear a lot in general, me and my brothers. So if you heard us talk on the phone, be like, guys, like those are all empty words. You don't need to say fuck every other word. I'm glad I have the podcast outlet for it, for sure. But thankfully, to this point, it hasn't really been an issue. I think there's so much tightness, for lack of a better way to put it, when it comes to a UFC telecast. I have to wear this tiny little fucking suit band. I have paint on my face, right? It's like, it's just not the climate in which I'm, I let loose and I let myself go. It's certainly when there's a moment that necessitates that. But yeah, no F-bomb just yet. We'll see.
Let's when it does eventually happen, if it does eventually happen, hopefully you don't get in trouble for it. So, I mean, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know we only had around a half hour and we've gone over that, which I really do appreciate. Sure. So before we go, anything that you want to shout out specifically with regard to things you're doing? Obviously, you have your podcast and just your personal things that you'd like to shout out, your Instagram, Twitter, best way people to send their love.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate, your thoughtful approach with some of these questions. You're really making me think. Anik and Florian podcast live on YouTube or on iTunes if you like the audio only. That is there for you. We got merchandise and all that stuff as well. If you like the One More Sleep merchandise that we just launched, you can go to millions.co or my Instagram page as well. And wish you all the best, man. I like this thing conceptually. And how much am I allowed to eat of this in one sitting? This stuff's just going to go down, man. I haven't even tried the sriracha honey.
So it's up to you. It depends on what your stomach can take and how much sodium you usually take in.
Yeah. Do I look fatter than when we started the interview? Hopefully not.
You look, I would say, more swole.
Yeah.
That's how I'd put it. You carved up before the Mr. Olympia competition started. So, Jon, I honestly thank you so much for your time. It really was a blast to talk to you and to get your perspective on a lot of these things. Thank you, and enjoy the jerky as much as you'd like. Share it with somebody if you want to, but you can also be a little bit selfish with it. I don't blame you.
Well, hopefully we can do it again down the line, and I wish you all the best to you and your family, and we will talk soon, my friend, I'm sure.
To you as well. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and make sure you check out the Fight Set Presents, like, subscribe, do all of that. Check out bensbeefjerkyspot.com if you want to purchase some of your own jerky. Thank you again, Jon. Appreciate it.
Thank you, buddy.